Good afternoon. First of all, along with President Obama, my prayers are with the people of France as they recover from this terrible, terrible tragedy. This is not just a tragedy that occurred in France. This is an international tragedy which could happen in the United States at any time, as we learned on September 11, 2001, when I was mayor of this great city. I also want to state that North Carolina has a proud tradition and a humanitarian obligation to provide a hands up for those in need, including international refugees. However, because President Obama earlier this year increased the number of refugees from Syria coming into the United States from 2,000 to 10,000 people, and because of the most recent attacks in Paris and the very real possibility that one of the terrorists entered France as a recent refugee, I am now requesting that the President and the federal government cease sending refugees from Syria to North Carolina until we are thoroughly satisfied with the effectiveness of the federal background checks and security checks conducted on such refugees entering our country. We are also reviewing refugee security from 33 special interest countries in consultation with the Department of Homeland Security and asking for more information on those who have already arrived here from those countries to determine if additional direction or background is needed, especially for our public safety personnel right here in North Carolina. For additional information, I want to communicate to you that from January 2014 until October 2015, North Carolina has received 59 refugees from Syria. To date, we have received almost little or no security information about those refugees, on their backgrounds, even possibly their names in certain circumstances. We are asking for more additional collaboration and basic information, such as where these refugees are now residing. I have instructed my Secretary of Health and Human Services, Rick Brazier, and Secretary of Department of Public Safety, Frank Perry, to work with and coordinate with appropriate federal representatives and report their findings back to me. And we are in constant communication right now with especially our two senators, and I'm also in communication with state representatives who have similar concerns. And I think these concerns are warranted in this time, as the French Premier says, is war. North Carolina has had connections to major terrorism activity in the past. For example, some of the terrorists involved in 9/11 attacks have had flight lessons right here in North Carolina. In September, a task force of Homeland Security Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives issued a report on, quote, combating terrorist and foreign fighter travel. The task force issued 32 key findings, one of which was, and I state in quotes, U.S. enforcement intelligence agencies remain concerned about terrorists posing as refugees. Agencies have made improvements to the refugee screening process, but more must be done to mitigate potential vulnerabilities, and we believe there are vulnerabilities at this point in time in North Carolina and throughout the country. Let me also share with you another quote from this report, and I quote, members of terrorist groups like ISIS have publicly bragged that they are working to sneak operatives into the West posing as refugees, and European officials are worried that this is already the case. Now, again, this is a recent report, and sadly, some of this report has come to be the truth. There are other recommendations that warrant a pause of our accepting refugees from Syria, including a number of serious overseas security gaps in countries that refugees use as gateways into the United States of America. My primary duty as governor is to protect the citizens of North Carolina, which is why I'm taking these steps and making this request of the President today. Now, again, before we go to questions, and I'm here to take questions, my prayers continue to be with the people of France. I also continue to pray for our men and women from the United States who are stationed across the world, and we pray for their safety, and we thank them for their service. With that, I'll be glad to take any questions that you might have. And if you could recognize yourself if I call on you and tell me who you're from and what media outlet you're representing, I'd appreciate it. With that, yes, sir.
Mark, WBT. Do
Hey,
you
Mark.
expect the President to take this request seriously or blow it off?
I think he's going to get a lot of requests from many, many governors. I know of at least 4 governors that have made this request in the last several hours, and I expect the chief executive of our country to listen from the chief executives from our 50 states. And this is the ninth largest state in the United States of America. Again, we have potential activity that has occurred here in the past that we investigate currently activity as we speak today, and I hope he does take this very seriously.
If he doesn't, do you have a plan B?
Let's find out if he does. I don't like to deal in hypotheticals, but I think all the governors will be. I'm going to be meeting with governors this week out west, and I'm sure all of us will be speaking as a group in the very near future.
Governor Brad Murphy from Channel 36. A Syrian family was just relocated here in Charlotte last week. What would you say to that family today? Are they welcome to stay, or would you like to see them?
They're here in the United States. What I request from the federal government is right now these families through the refugee coordination plan through our state are basically go through nonprofits. And after they contact the nonprofits, really the only thing North Carolina gets is a bill for the services provided that are paid for by the federal government. I think what my public safety people are requesting, and what I request as governor, is that we learn exactly who these people are, what their backgrounds are, and we know exactly where they're being relocated, so in case there are potential threats, we know where to follow through. And I think we've lost some control in the European countries, obviously due to the terrorist attack in Paris, and I think it could easily happen there too. Let me also say I empathize with these people that have been who are dealing with unimaginable atrocities from ISIS. I care for these people, but what worries me is some of these people could actually be ISIS coming into our country, and we need to take every precaution to make sure that our federal government is checking into these people. And frankly, I don't know how they're doing it right now because the governance in Syria is almost non-existent.
Jim from the Observer. You mentioned that other governors are doing this today or have done it today. Have you been in touch with any of them, and is this any kind of a coordinated?
No, it is not a coordinated effort. However, I anticipate this to be a major discussion probably the next several days. I will be in touch, and I'm also looking at what the other governors are doing. I actually started this process before during the weekend after the attacks occurred, my staff and I, especially my chief and staff, were in constant contact with Frank Perry in public safety to see of potential concerns that could be occurring in North Carolina. And we do that often. I get a report from Secretary of Public Safety on potential activity in North Carolina often. But there's no doubt that the Paris attack shows that there are could be some possible problems not only in Europe, but also here in the United States, especially since we've increased the number of refugees now from 2,000 to 10,000, I believe. And that occurred, I believe, in early September.
Governor, you said you used the word request twice in making this announcement. Is there anything tangible that your administration can do to stop that flow, or is this really, it's a federal program, it's run by the feds? Is there anything you can do to directly stop it if they don't heed your request?
Not that I'm aware of at this point in time. I'm examining as we make this request, I'm examining what the B plan is, because they come into the country with federal government approval, and then the federal government immediately directs them to nonprofits in each of our states. There is no communication with the state government. I had a very similar situation and a very similar press conference when we were allowing many more illegal immigrants coming through the Mexican border when thousands upon thousands of people were coming, and I held a very similar press conference in Raleigh about the lack of communication and collaboration that we get from the federal government, especially related to potential criminal activity. This is potential terrorist activity that we're concerned about at this point in time.
Follow-up question, Governor. I'm curious, you talk about 22 other nations of origin for these refugees. Can you tell us about some of them? It's not just Syria?
Well, I think Iraq would be the immediate one that we're most concerned about. And I think if you go look at we'll get you what those other 22 countries are. But Iraq and Iran is also on that list. But probably Iraq would be our most serious concern because we know there are ISIS groups in Iraq. Also, Afghanistan is a part of that list also. I'd let you do, I don't have the 22 countries in front of me, but those would be the three that stand out with me. But as we see, they're now in Europe. And as we're hearing through many of the publications, the passports and identifications, we could be having some major issues with them, and which states which countries require transfers between passports and visas and things of this nature.
Governor, some of these nonprofits are calling this a knee-jerk reaction, that these refugees are some of the most vetted people who come upon American soil. How do you respond to that?
I don't know how they can say that when, in fact, if they say that, I'd like to know how they're doing it at this point in time, because they're coming from governments in which are not well organized, and we'd like to know more about the vetting process. I'm not sure if the nonprofits are doing that vetting process. The federal government has made statements that they do a thorough security check. I don't know how that's done, and we'd like more collaboration on telling us exactly what they've done, and we'd like to have that information. That information is not being shared with our North Carolina people, with our North Carolina authorities. We have asked for it in the past, have not received it.
So are you saying you don't know who these people are, the refugees that are in the state, and you don't have any information about them?
Most of them that we see at this point in time, this is a very similar situation that we had with the most recent illegal immigrants that came across the border in past years that were also processed through nonprofits. And again, I want to thank the nonprofits for taking on this tremendous responsibility. Where the state government's role is with the nonprofits is the nonprofits bill the state governments for services provided, and we then also provide services that are paid for the federal government, including language and health services. So we want to continue to work with these nonprofits, but with all due respect to the nonprofits, we have an active war going on right now that could come again to our country. And my job as governor is to protect the people of our state, and that's my major responsibility as governor, while also showing empathy to the people that are being also harmed by those same people that are becoming terrorists in Europe and possibly in our country.
Governor, the State Department is vetting those people, which Catholic Charities, for example, told me today that that's their understanding. Are you saying you don't trust the State Department's vetting, or you just
I don't. That's correct. We don't know exactly how the State Department is vetting these current people or vetting the illegal immigrants that were coming in the past. It'd be nice, we would trust them more if they would tell us more of what they're doing. There's a very lack of coordination with our public safety officials. And again, I respect the work of these nonprofits and empathize and want to help those immigrants that are being accepted in our country, but I also want to make sure that we aren't opening up a potential terrorist situation without ensuring that the people that are coming in aren't also potential terrorists. And again, this is just from reports that we're getting that some of their goals are to incorporate potential terrorists into legal immigrants that are being accepted into our country and other countries. I hope you think that's a responsible thing to do.
Governor,
I'll take two more questions. Yes, sir.
What is the message for the people who will hear this tonight?
That the governor of this state and the governors of other state are asking the president to take a deep breath and ask the question: are the people coming from Syria, are they all people who we can ensure are safe to our citizens and are not terrorists? And we want to ensure that they have the proper background checks before they're accepted into the state of North Carolina. I am making a request of the President of the United States to cease allowing immigrants coming in from Syria until we get thorough verification that all the immigrants coming in are not safety risk. One more question.
Governor, Andrew Dunn with the Charlotte Agenda. So say the federal government were to give you information, names, addresses on the refugees coming in, what specifically would the state government do with that information?
Well, first of all, that means that allows our state agencies to more fully cooperate with potential activity and ensure that the potential activity from new immigrants coming into our country is not activity which could harm our citizens. We use our public safety enforcement agencies to work together, whether it be city police, county sheriffs, and SBI, and my highway patrol, to all work together with a potential database to ensure that the citizens of North Carolina are safe, and that's my goal. This is a very unique times, and it's times where we have to take appropriate cautionary action to protect our citizens, but also while being understanding that many of these people that are coming to this country are also dealing with that process, this terrible group that's called ISIS, that is dealing in the most horrific, violent activity that I've seen in my lifetime. And I don't want that activity to come to this country, like we didn't want it to come to Europe and to Paris, as we saw this past weekend. And that's my goal, is to stop any of this activity from coming to the state of North Carolina. And I will continue to fulfill that obligation to protect the citizens of North Carolina as long as I'm governor. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.